On June 12, 1944, at 9:23 am, engineers from the Fighting Vehicles Proving Establishment in Chzy, Surrey, were preparing to assess a German Panther tank that Nazi propaganda had declared as invincible. The specific model was a Panther Ausf D serial number 213-101, manufactured by Maschinen Fabrik Nidos and Hanover in June 1943. The Soviets captured this tank on the Eastern Front and shipped it to Britain for thorough examination. The testing facility at Chzy had been operational since 1942, where British engineers were well versed in evaluating armoured vehicles. They understood tanks inside out, knowing their engineering nuances, strengths, and weaknesses. However, the Panther was unlike any other tank they had encountered before. German newsreels showcased it as a formidable force that crushed Soviet resistance, while training films depicted its technological superiority over Allied tanks. British crews would soon face this machine in Normandy. On paper, the Panther appeared to be an imposing weapon system, weighing 45 tons with a powerful 690 horsepower Maybach HL230 engine limited to about 600 horsepower under normal conditions due to a governor set at 2,500 revolutions per minute. Its maximum road speed reached 46 km/h, and it boasted frontal armor measuring 80 mm thick at a 55-degree angle, armed with a potent 7.5 cm UK-42 gun firing standard armor, piercing rounds with a muzzle velocity of 935 ms. Despite these impressive specifications on paper, British test teams were about to uncover what the German High Command had already recognized but refused to acknowledge. The Panther was plagued by mechanical issues. The testing protocol followed at Chzy mirrored those used for British tanks such as the Churchill, Cromwell, and Sherman. Evaluations that included cross-country mobility tests, road speed trials, suspension assessments, hill climbing exercises, brake tests, endurance runs, and more. These standard procedures were routinely passed by all British tanks, but the Panther was about to reveal its true nature under these rigorous conditions. The evaluation team was unaware that they would never finish the entire testing program, as the Panther's lifespan was too short to permit it. During the initial trials, the first issue surfaced when test drivers reported a complete failure of third gear. When shifting into this gear, all that could be heard were grinding noises and erratic jumps. The test crew comprised seasoned tank operators with extensive experience in the Royal Tank Regiment, who had driven numerous British tanks as well as several captured German vehicles. They possessed the expertise to distinguish between operator error and mechanical breakdowns. It was evident to them that this was a significant mechanical failure, not just minor issues. The Panther's transmission featured a 7-speed gearbox with one reverse gear intended for precise control over the tank's speed. However, its complexity made it vulnerable to malfunction. Smooth operation required each gear shift to be perfectly synchronized, and every component had to work flawlessly. Upon attempting to engage third gear, internal components such as synchro mesh rings or sliding collars had already failed, preventing the gears from properly engaging. This led to destructive internal friction within the transmission. The evaluation team documented this critical issue in their official logs. The third gear was not functioning, but the cause remained undetermined. Despite this issue, the team proceeded with testing without it. Most of their evaluation protocols did not necessitate a fully operational third gear, allowing them to continue their work around its absence. Previous trials on British tanks that had experienced similar gear failures had been completed successfully, suggesting that one failed component was insufficient grounds for halting the assessment. However, what followed presented a significant challenge. During suspension tests over rough terrain, the Panther exhibited unexpected behavior that puzzled the evaluation team. The double torsion bar suspension system, which was supposed to be an advanced feature, felt harsh and uncomfortable. When encountering bumps, the vehicle's nose would dip violently, causing the front suspension to bottom out completely. Inside, the crew reported being thrown around with enough force to cause bruising. This performance defied explanation for the engineers. The Panther's suspension appeared sophisticated, featuring dual torsion bars for each of its 8 interleaved road wheels on either side, totaling 36 wheels arranged in an intricate overlapping pattern. German engineering had aimed for a smooth ride and optimal weight distribution. Yet, in practice, the suspension performed less effectively than the comparatively simple system found in British tanks like the Churchill. To gain objective insights into the suspension's performance, the evaluation team installed accelerometers within the crew compartment and set up cameras to record the movement of each wheel. The collected data corroborated the crew's experiences. The Panther's suspension had an extremely short travel range before bottoming out, leading to abrupt impacts when front road wheels encountered obstacles. The theoretical benefit of the dual torsion bar system's ability to manage higher loads with improved damping did not translate into enhanced crew comfort or superior cross-country performance. In contrast, when identical tests were conducted using a Churchill 7, its suspension system demonstrated far less harshness in handling obstacles. The Churchill utilized a coil spring suspension with 11 road wheels per side on each track. Although this setup was simpler and heavier, it offered greater flexibility. Crew members of the Churchill reported experiencing a comfortable ride even over rugged terrain, whereas Panther crew members felt every bump distinctly. Observers participating in cross-country trials noted that crew fatigue would significantly impact combat effectiveness. A fatigued crew due to an uncomfortable suspension would respond more slowly, exhibit reduced accuracy with their guns, and be more exhausted after prolonged operations. Thus, the harsh ride of the Panther was not merely a comfort issue, but also a tactical disadvantage. In road speed tests, disappointment ensued. German specifications stated that the Panther could achieve 46 km per hour on paved surfaces, which the British team confirmed under ideal conditions. However, when tested off-road, the Panther's performance deteriorated significantly. Despite being classified as a medium tank with emphasis on mobility, it moved more sluggishly than the heavier Churchill 7 across uneven terrain. Moreover, while the Panther lacked the heavy armor protection that characterized infantry tanks like the Churchill, its mobility was comparable to that of a slow-moving heavy tank. On June 14th, during hill climbing tests at Farnham Park, an incident occurred. The test protocol mandated climbing steep slopes routinely tackled by British tanks without issue. For instance, the Cromwell could ascend these inclines swiftly in second gear, while the Churchill managed to climb them steadily, albeit more slowly, using first gear, and consistently succeeded in doing so. The Sherman navigated the inclines effortlessly. In contrast, the Panther ascended a steep 40-degree slope without any issues. The test procedure then dictated reversing down the hill. The driver carefully maneuvered the tank into position for descent and shifted to reverse gear. As expected, the Panther began its controlled backward descent. Suddenly, disaster struck partway down the slope. A catastrophic engine malfunction occurred. It wasn't a minor backfire or a simple misfire, it was an explosive detonation inside the engine compartment. The sound echoed like that of a bomb exploding. The blast pressure was so intense that it forced open the engine access hatches, their latches incapable of containing the force. Flames erupted instantly around the fuel pumps at the forward left corner of the engine bay, producing distinct orange flames characteristic of burning gasoline. Thick black smoke billowed from the compartment, emitting a pungent odor of burning fuel and overheated metal. The test driver reacted quickly by bringing the tank to an emergency stop, shutting off the engine and opening his hatch. Following their training, the 4-man crew, consisting of the driver, radio operator, gunner and commander, immediately evacuated through their respective hatches within just 10 seconds. The firefighting crew swiftly moved in with Perini fire extinguishers, which are typically used for vehicle fires. 4 individuals positioned themselves on either side of the engine compartment, directing streams of chemical suppressant at the blaze. The flames briefly intensified as fresh oxygen flowed in, but ultimately succumbed to the chemicals within 30 seconds of ignition. Prompt action and well-executed training averted significant damage. Upon inspection, engineers discovered that although there was no substantial harm from the initial explosion, the backfire had managed to trigger unexpected fire. Major components remained undamaged, including the fuel system, which retained its integrity despite the incident. While the engine could still operate, such powerful backfires were unusual and raised concerns about potential weaknesses in the design. The report highlighted that the Maybach engine's high compression ratio contributed to these abnormal combustion events. This characteristic created an environment conducive to catastrophic backfires. The issue was inherent to the engine's architecture itself. After addressing the fire, related damage tests resumed immediately. Given the imminent deployment of Panther tanks against British forces in Normandy by early June, it was crucial for the War Office to have detailed information on both their strengths and weaknesses. Consequently, evaluations proceeded despite the earlier setback, focusing on stability tests like pitch and roll maneuvers. On June 14th, each test vehicle, including the Panther, navigated a course filled with ramps and obstacles at varying speeds, 10 mph, 15 mph, and 20 mph. A camera attached to the turret documented the pitch and roll fluctuations. This experiment assessed the suspension's performance and the crew's comfort during tactical maneuvers. However, the results for the Panther were inconsistent. While the camera footage indicated that the suspension effectively reduced oscillations faster than those of British tanks, every member of the evaluation team who experienced cross-country travel in the vehicle reported an extremely uncomfortable ride due to its stiff and inflexible nature. This discrepancy implied that while the Panther's suspension system appeared favorable on paper, it did not provide satisfactory crew comfort or operational efficiency in practice. The second incident occurred on July 28th during endurance tests at Long Valley. The procedure involved circling a test track repeatedly to assess mechanical durability under prolonged use. After completing one full lap, issues arose with the steering as the Panther began its second circuit. Following standard protocol for degraded steering response, the driver halted the vehicle and turned off the engine. Soon after, thick smoke filled the turret, emanating from the engine bay. Seconds later, an explosion erupted within the compartment, igniting the floor of the engine area. Flames rapidly spread throughout the space. This fire was more intense than the first one. By the time the crew could respond, the entire engine section was engulfed in flames. The evacuation occurred promptly as soon as the fire was detected. Despite the rapid arrival of the fire suppression team, the blaze had already spread too far and wide to be contained easily. The flames engulfed the Maybach engine, causing it to burn fiercely. Fuel lines melted and hydraulic fluid ignited, exacerbating the situation further. The intense heat twisted metal components beyond recognition. By the time they managed to extinguish the fire, the damage to the Panther's engine compartment was so severe that repair costs outweighed its value. Engineers conducted a thorough examination of the remnants. Their detailed findings were compiled into an official report by the Fighting Vehicles Proving Establishment in May 1944. The incident had been triggered by another backfire, which occurred after the engine had been shut down. An incandescent residue, likely carbon deposits from the spark plugs or glowing particles within the combustion chamber, ignited fuel vapors inside the engine. This backfire propelled a mixture of oil and fuel vapor through air cleaners located centrally on the unit. Positioned beneath the filters, this caused fuel and oil to spray directly onto the hot valve covers and exhaust manifolds when the backfire occurred. Given that the engine was still warm from recent operation, ignition ensued instantaneously, resulting in an explosive force powerful enough to rupture flexible fuel lines and cause burning fuel to spill into the engine compartment. The vehicle essentially burned itself out from within, leading to the cessation of trials on this particular machine. Despite the tests having concluded only in late July, the findings were scathing. The Panther tank was found to be inferior to any British tank currently in service. Mechanical issues during limited trials were rampant and unacceptable. Third gear failed immediately and remained out of commission throughout the testing period. Although the suspension boasted impressive technical specifications, its performance left much to be desired. Additionally, the engine had a tendency to catch fire catastrophically. The report highlighted that many test results were inconclusive due to mechanical failures before comprehensive evaluation could be completed. Document FT1391 became an essential intelligence document distributed to British tank units preparing for Normandy operations. Specific comparisons with British tanks were included in the report. On cross-country terrain, the average speed of the Panther was significantly lower than that of the Churchill 7, despite being classified as a medium tank compared to the Churchill's heavy designation. On roads, the maximum verified speed was approximately 30 mph, aligning with German claims. However, reliability emerged as the most critical issue. The report plainly stated that the extent of mechanical problems indicated the Panther performed poorly in comparison to any British tank then in service. Regarding the suspension, while camera data revealed a significant ability to dampen oscillations, staff members who rode across varied terrain found it inadequate. The ride was harsh and uncomfortable, contributing to crew fatigue during extended operations. However, this initial evaluation of captured German Panthers would be dwarfed by subsequent assessments conducted on a much larger scale 3 years later, ultimately proving the myth of Germany's technical superiority in tank design beyond doubt. World War II ended in May 1945. As British forces advanced into Germany, they seized vast quantities of German equipment. In April 1945, when British 9th Army captured Hanover, one of the 3 major Panther assembly plants was discovered there. Since early 1943, the Maschinenfabrik Nietzen-Hanover plant, known as M&H, had been manufacturing Panther tanks. Upon the arrival of British forces in mid-March 1945, they discovered that Allied bombing raids had partially destroyed the assembly lines. However, numerous components were still available for use. Engines, transmissions, whole sections, turrets, and gun systems were all present, awaiting assembly. The British occupation included the 8023rd Armoured Troops Workshop of the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers (REM). This unit specialized in repairing and maintaining armored vehicles. They reached Hanover on June 8, 1945, initially setting up operations at the nearby Hanomag factory. Under Captain William J. Hadlow's command, they received orders from British Army of the Rhine headquarters to assemble as many Panther tanks as possible using the remaining parts found at the MH facility. The objective was clear: to evaluate how the Panther tank compared against British designs like the upcoming Centurion and the experimental Black Prince heavy tank. The 8023rd Workshop moved to a factory in Lennon, south of Hanover, on June 29, 1945. While the MH assembly line at Linden was too damaged for use, the Lennon facility remained largely intact. During the war, Lelson had been a sub-assembly plant producing track links, gun tubes, and various smaller Panther components. With good overhead lighting and a functional roof structure, along with adequate workspace, Captain Hadlow organized the assembly project methodically. A trained Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers officer, he had extensive experience in vehicle recovery and repair. Former German workers who had built Panthers during the war were retained to assist. These individuals possessed detailed knowledge of the tank's systems, having assembled hundreds of them over the years. While many felt conflicted about assisting the British, others recognized that Germany's defeat did not diminish national pride, but highlighted practical needs such as employment and financial stability for themselves and their families who required sustenance. The British compensated them with occupation marks and supplied rations, leading to a shift where pragmatic concerns outweighed ideological ones. During the assembly process, British REM mechanics oversaw operations while simultaneously acquiring knowledge through hands-on experience. This collaboration exposed significant differences in engineering philosophies between Britain and Germany. British tanks were designed for ease of maintenance under battlefield conditions using basic tools, with components that were easily accessible and often interchangeable across various models. In contrast, German tanks like the Panther embodied a level of mechanical precision akin to high-precision machinery. Tight tolerances and intricate system interactions characterized the Panther's construction, necessitating specialized tools for access and adjustment. Proper maintenance of such tanks required extensive resources and technical expertise, which were unlikely to be available in combat scenarios. Essentially, the Panther was an assembly line tank rather than one suited for field repairs. The team adhered strictly to original German quality control methods. Each chassis had to undergo a test drive over 15 kilometers without its turret to ensure proper functioning of automotive parts such as engine operation, transmission performance, steering response, track tension, and suspension functionality. Once the turret was mounted, a task requiring an overhead crane due to its significant weight, the completed tank then underwent another rigorous test drive covering 50 to 60 kilometers. These procedures mirrored those implemented during wartime production by MNH, Maschinenfabrik Niedersachsen, Hanover. The newly assembled Panthers underwent rigorous testing at Hethland near Leighton, driven by REM drivers accompanied by German mechanics for guidance. Despite being meticulously put together with high-quality components under favorable conditions, these brand-new tanks quickly exhibited maintenance issues during their initial break-in period. All leaks were observed around the valve covers, coolant seeped from engine seals, and steering became increasingly stiff as the clutches deteriorated. This occurred despite the vehicles being constructed from entirely new parts. The assembly process lasted 9 months, concluding in spring 1946 after the completion of 9 Panther tanks and 12 Jag Panthers at the 8023 workshop from August 1945 onward. Each completed tank was fitted with a brass plaque affixed to its front glacis plate, identifying it as having been assembled by the British Army REM in MHH Hanover's 823 Armoured Workshop. These brand new Panthers adhered strictly to wartime production specifications, but were built under British oversight following Germany's surrender. The plaque served as permanent proof of this distinctive assembly operation. In late 1947, the fighting vehicles proving establishment at Chzy received 5 of these vehicles for exhaustive testing, 2 Panther tanks, 2 Jag Panthers, and 1 Berg Panther armored recovery vehicle. The objective was ambitious, subjecting all 3 variants to the full British acceptance trial program, including every test required for new British tanks. These trials aim to provide comprehensive data on how the Panthers compared to British armour in terms of cross-country mobility, road performance, hill climbing, endurance, and reliability. Ultimately, the British would possess extensive scientific data regarding the tank that German propaganda had declared invincible. Testing commenced in February 1948. The vehicles were equipped with ballast plates to replicate the weight of ammunition, fuel, and crew supplies at their full combat load. Each Panther tank weighed 44.5 tons, while Jagged Panthers tipped the scales at 46 tons, and Berger Panthers came in at 42.5 tons. All 5 units were relatively new. The Panthers and Jag Panthers had been assembled in 1945, but had minimal operational use since then. The Berger Panther had logged just 632 kilometers before arriving for testing and required a fresh engine to be installed prior to trials beginning. No spare parts aside from replacement engines were on hand, meaning that each vehicle would need to undergo the tests using only its original components. Within days of initiating the trials, it became evident that completing the entire test program was unfeasible due to mechanical failures occurring at an alarming rate. Steering mechanisms malfunctioned frequently, engines caught fire, and transmissions broke down. The engineering team overseeing the testing, including personnel from the Fighting Vehicle Design Department, swiftly recognized the necessity for a change in strategy. They abandoned their initial plan of separately testing each Panther variant and shifted focus towards gathering whatever data they could from the remaining operational vehicles, while salvaging parts from the damaged ones to keep others running. The first significant malfunction occurred during preliminary cross-country trials when one of the Panthers experienced a complete failure of its steering mechanism. This particular failure provided valuable insights into the exact nature of the issue. The Panther's steering mechanism relied on both clutches and brakes. To execute a left turn, the operator would activate the clutch that disconnected power to the left track while simultaneously engaging the brake to slow it down. This caused the tank to pivot towards the slower side. For right turns, the same procedure was followed but applied to the opposite side. This system functioned adequately on level terrain and at moderate speeds. However, under challenging conditions such as rough terrain or during sharp turns, it often led to catastrophic failures. During a cross-country test run, the driver attempted a sudden left turn while crossing an uneven section of the course. He engaged the clutch for the left track and applied the brake. Unfortunately, the clutch slipped instead of disengaging smoothly, leading to overheating and burning. The friction material was damaged, producing smoke from the housing. As a result, steering became erratic and unpredictable. Despite attempts to correct the situation, the driver found that the clutch had been irreparably damaged, rendering the left side steering mechanism non-functional. Consequently, the tank could only turn right, making it nearly impossible to control properly. The test was immediately halted and the vehicle was withdrawn from testing. Engineers then dismantled the Panther for inspection, where they discovered and removed the destroyed clutch assembly for further examination. The friction surfaces were charred black, indicating severe overheating of the clutch due to excessive load. This malfunction stemmed from a design flaw rather than a manufacturing issue. The clutch was undersized for the demands imposed by the Panther's weight during rigorous steering maneuvers. Shortly after crossing, country testing began with the second Panther tank. It encountered significant engine troubles. The Maybach engine rapidly overheated, causing temperature gauges to reach critical levels. Coolant temperatures surpassed 100 degrees C, prompting the test driver to report warning lights on the dashboard. Despite reducing speed, the rising temperature persisted, signaling a malfunction within the cooling system. The Panther's cooling system was intricate and complex. Its design included an enclosed engine compartment, originally intended for amphibious operations, although this feature was never fully realized in production models. This sealed environment posed challenges for adequate cooling. Air intake and exhaust needed to be ducted properly, and coolant had to circulate efficiently through strategically positioned radiators. Any impediments or blockages in the airflow or coolant pathways would swiftly lead to overheating. Following established protocols, the test driver continued with the run despite the high temperatures, which had not yet reached critical failure points. However, this sequence of events mirrored issues previously noted by British engineers 3 years earlier. The engine produced an explosive backfire resembling a gunshot within the compartment. Suddenly, there was an explosion in the engine bay, followed immediately by flames that burst through the deck grills and dark smoke that billowed out in thick plumes. The driver quickly shut off the engine and evacuated the vehicle. Despite the rapid response of the fire suppression team, they faced a more intense blaze than what they encountered during testing in 1944. The flames had spread to several fuel lines, rendering fire extinguishers ineffective against such high temperatures. Once the firefighters managed to get the inferno under control, it was clear that significant damage had been done. Valve covers were melted, fuel lines were burned through, and the wiring harness was completely incinerated. Additionally, the carburetor suffered irreparable damage. The Maybach HL230 engine, which had cost thousands of Reichsmarks to produce during World War II, lay in ruins, now little more than scrap metal. Consequently, this Panther tank was decommissioned and designated for spare parts, with components such as its transmission, steering clutches, road wheels, and anything else salvageable being added to the inventory to support other operational Panthers. Although the first Jag Panther endured longer before succumbing to similar destruction, The outcome remained largely identical. The vehicle completed several successful test runs, prompting the team to hope for valuable data from at least one unit. However, during an endurance test, the transmission failed dramatically. Internal gears were stripped within the gearbox, rendering the vehicle incapable of forward movement. It was then towed back to the maintenance area and dismantled for spare parts. An internal inspection revealed broken gear teeth under load, indicating that the transmission components lacked sufficient strength to handle the vehicle's weight and operational demands. As a result, the second German Panther automatically became the main test vehicle due to its remaining mobility. The team devoted all their efforts to keeping this single unit operational. They conducted various mobility tests and road speed runs, but the German Panther was deteriorating quickly. Steering became progressively harder to manage, and concerning noises were heard from the transmission, including grinding sounds during gear shifts and metallic clanking during sharp maneuvers. The engine also started consuming oil at an alarming rate, necessitating frequent top-ups after each test run. Disasters struck during the hill, climbing trials when the vehicle was subjected to brake, holding tests on steep slopes, a crucial part of evaluating a tank's ability to maintain position on inclines during combat. This capability is essential for defensive operations where tanks must fight from hull-down positions on hillsides. For these tests, the tracked German Panther ascended slope number 4, which had a 35% grade and was steep enough that most wheeled vehicles could not climb it at all. Despite the challenging terrain, the German Panther managed to ascend successfully. The Maybach engine powered a 46-ton vehicle up the incline steadily. Upon reaching the summit, the test driver angled the vehicle upwards on the slope and engaged the brakes. The procedure mandated maintaining the vehicle in place for 30 seconds before releasing the brakes and proceeding over the crest. This straightforward test was carried out regularly on British tanks. As the driver pressed the brake pedal, it became clear that something had gone wrong when the vehicle held steady for only about 5 seconds. The pedal then sank to the floor, indicating a complete failure of the braking system. With no way to stop, the German Panther began sliding backward down the steep slope. Accelerating in reverse at 46 tons, with a grade of 35%, posed an imminent danger. Despite his efforts to steer and control the descent, the vehicle's speed increased relentlessly. The steering mechanism responded increasingly sluggishly until it ceased altogether. The German Panther was now hurtling downhill faster with each passing moment. At the bottom of the slope lay a tree stump. A large oak stump about half a meter high had been left from previous land clearing activities. Striking this obstruction at around 25 kilometers per hour proved catastrophic. The impact caused violent vibrations throughout the vehicle as the crew members were violently thrown against their restraints. Metal screeched in protest as the hull collided with the immovable stump, and one of the massive steel torsion bars that supported the road wheels and provided suspension was broken. This broken bar, under extreme spring tension, pierced through the gearbox wall like a spear-piercing armor. The transmission casing was ruptured, causing transmission fluid to spill onto the ground. Inside the gearbox, gears became misaligned and damaged, rendering the entire transmission system unusable. The final operational vehicle became irreparably disabled with the resources on hand. The crew then evacuated, though they were unhurt, feeling rattled by the incident. At the foot of the slope, the German Panther lay still, leaking transmission fluid onto the ground. Engineers closely inspected the damage and found that the torsion bar had pierced through the gearbox casing entirely. No spare gearboxes were in stock to replace the damaged one. On-site repairs, or even those conducted at a workshop, proved impossible without access to factory-level resources. In a desperate attempt to continue with the trials, the German Panther, an armored recovery vehicle, was used as a substitute despite its non-combat designation. The team endeavored to complete the 27M cross-country endurance test using it, but midway through the gearbox failed once again. With no spare parts and all operational vehicles either destroyed by fire or rendered inoperable due to mechanical issues, the trials were forced to come to an end permanently. The Fighting Vehicle Design Department issued their final report in February 1948. The document succinctly outlined the conclusions given the steering mechanism's inherent unreliability and the engine's tendency to catch fire. It was impractical to complete the full scope of the test program as initially planned. All testing for the 3 Panther variants had been abandoned early on due to severe mechanical failures that left all available vehicles out of commission before trials could be completed. Minimal valuable data was gleaned from the trials. The primary cause cited for this failure was the widespread mechanical unreliability of both Panther and Jagged Panther tanks. The report ended with a definitive recommendation to terminate the project, asserting that further testing would be futile. There were no remaining operational vehicles available for additional testing, no spare parts to fix broken units, and the ones already tested had displayed such poor reliability that more data would not alter the fundamental conclusion. The discrepancy between German propaganda and British test results was stark. German newsreels depicted Panthers as invincible, while technical documentation touted them as advanced and sophisticated. Training materials highlighted their superiority over Allied tanks. However, when subjected to routine tests that British tanks routinely passed, every Panther failed disastrously. None completed the standard acceptance trials. Each of the 5 tested vehicles suffered catastrophic mechanical failure, resulting in 0 successful test completions. Through 2 separate evaluation programs, the 1944 testing of Panthers provided by the Soviets and the 1947-1948 tests conducted on REM assembled Panthers, British engineers uncovered a fundamental flaw in German tank design philosophy. During the war, Germans focused on specifications that appeared impressive on paper: heavy armor at steep angles, high-velocity guns with exceptional penetration capabilities, and advanced suspension systems featuring intricate engineering. Yet, these components failed to function reliably under battlefield conditions. The designs did not account for maintainability, ease of repair by average crews, or operational feasibility in combat scenarios. In 1943, the Panther tank was hastily put into production to satisfy Adolf Hitler's strict deadline for the Kursk offensive. The dictator demanded that Panthers be operational by July of that year for Operation Citadel. This ambitious plan aimed to encircle and capture the Kursk salient. Although the design was completed in January 1942, rigorous testing was truncated. Issues were largely ignored. Production commenced before thorough evaluation could occur. Consequently, the early Panther models delivered to the front lines in July 1943 proved highly problematic. German military records provide a grim account of these initial deployments. Of the approximately 200 Panthers that participated in Operation Citadel, an alarming number experienced mechanical failures surpassing combat-related losses. On July 5, 1943, the first day of the offensive, only around 40 Panthers were still operational by nightfall. The remaining tanks had suffered a variety of breakdowns. Transmissions failed, final drives malfunctioned, engines overheated and ignited spontaneously, and steering systems broke down. Some Panthers caught fire without being struck by enemy fire, with internal fires destroying vehicles that never engaged Soviet forces. During the battle, General Heinrich Guderian, Inspector General of Armored Troops, visited the front lines to assess Panther performance firsthand. His detailed reports highlighted critical issues such as catastrophic final drive failures and transmission breakdowns after minimal use. Additionally, he noted infrequent instances where engines would ignite without external interference. Guderian advised suspending Panther production until the underlying issues could be addressed, but his advice was disregarded by higher authorities. Germany urgently required tanks, especially considering that the Eastern Front was depleting armored vehicles at an unsustainable pace. Halting production for engineering enhancements was deemed impractical. Instead, a strategy of gradual improvements while maintaining manufacturing output and tolerating high attrition rates due to mechanical breakdowns was adopted. The German response involved making incremental adjustments to subsequent models. For instance, the Führung A variant introduced in September 1943 featured modifications aimed at enhancing reliability. In spring 1944, the Führung G model brought additional changes. However, these alterations merely addressed superficial issues rather than addressing fundamental design flaws. The Panther's engine was already overburdened from its inception. Originally designed for a tank weighing between 30 and 35 tons, the Maybach HL230 had to cope with a production Panther that weighed 45 tons. Operating well beyond its intended load capacity by about 30%, this led to persistent overheating issues. This resulted in excessive fuel consumption and created conditions conducive to backfires and engine fires that plagued Panthers throughout the conflict. Similarly, the transmission and final drive were overstressed. Gearbox components designed for lighter loads experienced rapid wear and frequent failure when subjected to the Panther's actual combat weight. German field reports from Normandy in June 1944 revealed that Panther engines generally required major overhauls or replacements after running for approximately 400 to 500 kilometers. However, the final drives often failed much sooner, sometimes within a few hundred kilometers of operation. German tank units reported frequently dismantling disabled Panthers to maintain operational readiness in others. The term repeatedly used in these reports emphasized that Panthers had to be kept running through rigorous maintenance rather than reliable performance. The steering system employed a clutch and brake mechanism deemed insufficient for the Panther's weight, leading to rapid wear when subjected to heavy strain during sharp turns or challenging terrain conditions. This caused clutches to slip or burn out, as observed by British testers in 1948. The Panther Crew Manual, published on July 1, 1944, cautioned against overworking the steering brake system, warning that such behavior could quickly lead to engine failure and stating that those who disregarded this advice lacked understanding of tank operation. This language did not reflect a manual for a reliable, well-engineered vehicle, but rather conveyed the fragility of the Panther, necessitating careful handling to prevent catastrophic breakdowns. Engine fires destroying both the British Test Panther in July 1944 and multiple Panthers during the 1948 trials were not isolated incidents, they were systemic issues documented throughout German service. Combat reports from June 28, 1944, shortly after the Normandy landings, noted that Panthers had a tendency to catch fire quickly. The phrase used was Die Panther brennt or Serodent Lel, indicating widespread recognition of this problem among German commanders since the Kursk campaign in July 1943. Despite knowledge of these severe fire risks, fundamental engine design flaws remained unresolved throughout World War II. The root causes were exactly what British engineers had previously pinpointed: backfires setting off carburetor overflow, oil leaks from valve covers dripping onto hot exhaust manifolds, and defective fuel pump seals leading to gasoline puddles in the engine compartment. A German report compiled between March and April 1944 detailed how excess fuel from overflowing carburetors could wet spark plugs and discharge unburned fuel through exhaust header gaskets, causing external fires. When British engineers investigated the wreckage of a burned-up Panther tank in July 1944, they confirmed the same failure mechanisms that German engineers had identified earlier. Despite this knowledge, no corrective action was taken. British tank crews who seized Panthers during combat and tried to use them against German forces encountered these reliability issues firsthand. One notable example involved a Panther G captured by the 4th Battalion of the Coldstream Guards in Holland during autumn 1944. The retreating German crew claimed that transmission failure had caused their abandonment of the vehicle, which British soldiers found seemingly undamaged and successfully started before putting it back into service against its former owners. They christened it Chzy and painted large white recognition symbols on both the hull and turret to avoid friendly fire incidents. A crew was assembled from volunteers who learned to operate the German controls. Chzy was extensively documented. with photos including Imperial War Museum image showing it in action near Giston Castle on the Mars River on November 29, 1944. Initially, British crews were impressed by certain aspects of the Panther, its powerful and accurate 7.5 C-422 gun, which outperformed those mounted on Churchill's, its precision Zeiss optical sights, superior to any British counterparts, and its thick frontal armor offering protection against German anti-tank guns at close range. Chzy saw active duty for almost 3 months with the Guards Tank Brigade. Crews reported that when the Panther functioned properly, it was a formidable weapon. The gun could destroy enemy tanks from distances where German weapons would not penetrate its frontal armor. The optics provided accurate targeting at extended ranges, but Chzy demanded ongoing upkeep. Its engines suffered from persistent oil leakage, and fuel consumption was exceptionally high, surpassing that of British tanks in the same region. Frequent adjustments were necessary for the steering system, and although the transmission had initially caused German crews to abandon it, this issue persisted throughout its service with the British forces. While operational, the transmission emitted worrisome noises like grinding during gear changes and metallic clanks during sharp maneuvers. British mechanics devoted considerable effort between missions to keep Chzy running. After nearly 3 months of use, mechanical failure ultimately terminated its combat operations. Historical accounts vary regarding whether the final breakdown involved fuel or pump system issues, but all agree that it was a mechanical fault rather than enemy action that ended Britain's longest period of using a captured Panther in active service. No spare parts were available to fix the malfunctioning component, as German Panther components did not match British ones, and there was no supply chain for such equipment within Allied logistics. Chzy was subsequently retired from duty. The Coldstream Guards reverted to utilizing their Churchill and Cromwell tanks, which, though slower and less well armed compared to the Panther, were far more dependable. While a Churchill might struggle to penetrate a Panther's frontal armor, it would remain operational after a week of continuous operations, unlike the likely breakdown of a Panther that needed frequent repairs and specialized maintenance. The French army faced similar challenges following World War II, when operating captured Panthers within their military units stationed in occupied Germany through the late 1940s. Maintenance records documented incessant mechanical issues, including engine failures necessitating replacement, transmission breakdowns, steering malfunctions, and final drive failures. Due to unsustainable maintenance demands, the French ultimately discontinued using these captured Panthers. Despite having access to German spare parts and mechanics with experience operating Panther tanks, the French were unable to maintain these vehicles reliably. By 1950, France had completely phased out its inventory of captured German tanks, opting instead for American-supplied Shermans and domestically produced vehicles. Although on paper the Panther excelled in firepower and armor protection compared to both types, practical challenges rendered it impractical for sustained use. Several factors emerged from these experiences. British testing in 1944 and again between 1947 and 1948 provided significant insights. Reports from German combat engagements at Kursk through the end of World War II also contributed to a consistent pattern. Attempts by Allied forces to deploy captured Panthers in combat were fraught with mechanical issues. The Panther proved to be highly maintenance-intensive, mechanically unreliable, and required exceptional care along with immediate access to spare parts for operational reliability. Under controlled factory conditions with skilled mechanics and ample spare parts, the Panther could function adequately over limited periods. However, in the harsh realities of actual combat scenarios involving field maintenance, limited spare parts availability, and regular crews under stress, Panthers frequently broke down. British testing programs during both 1944 and between 1947-1948, which involved Soviet-provided Panther tanks and those assembled locally, supplied Allied intelligence with crucial data. Tank crews from Britain and the United States learned not to be intimidated by the Panther's reputation. While it boasted thick frontal armor difficult for other tanks to penetrate and a powerful long-range gun capable of destroying enemy vehicles at distance, its mechanical fragility was undeniable. Combat tactics were subsequently refined to capitalize on these weaknesses. Strategies included forcing Panthers into situations that imposed significant mechanical stress, such as maneuvering through rugged terrain or rapidly climbing hills. By engaging in close-quarters combat where the Panthers' range advantage was negated, Allied forces could effectively neutralize this formidable tank. The mechanical shortcomings of the Panthers turned into tactical liabilities that shaped Allied combat strategies. Starting from summer 1944, British tank tactics in northwest Europe were designed to exploit the Panthers' unreliability. They aimed to force engagements in close quarters where the Panthers' superior gun range could not be utilized effectively. By constantly moving and maneuvering these tanks, they ensured mechanical failures would occur, rendering the Panthers as ineffective as if they had been destroyed. German reports indicated that numerous abandoned Panthers on the battlefield showed no signs of combat damage. Only mechanical issues prevented their crews from repairing them under field conditions. The evaluation of Panther tanks by British forces underscores the distinction between engineering for specifications and focusing on reliability. The Germans produced a tank that appeared impressive on paper and in propaganda films, boasting thick armor, powerful guns, sophisticated suspension systems, and advanced fire control optics. In contrast, British Churchills and Cromwells, along with American Shermans, had inferior armor and less potent weapons compared to their German counterparts. However, they remained operational and could be serviced by ordinary mechanics using basic tools in field conditions. They did not experience spontaneous fires due to design flaws and were able to complete missions without breaking down. 5 brand new Panthers underwent testing at Chzy from February until mid-1948. Despite being built under ideal circumstances with high-quality German components and meticulous assembly, none of these tanks could pass the standard acceptance trials. Each one failed mechanically before completing its test program. One Panther was completely destroyed when its engine caught fire, another suffered a catastrophic failure in its steering clutch, and yet another had transmission gears stripped during operation. A gearbox failed when a cracked torsion bar penetrated the housing after brake malfunction on an incline. The 5th unit was stripped for parts before it could be tested due to rapid failures in the others. This detail, recorded in official British Army documents, seals the Panther tank's fate as a flawed weapon system. It did not live up to its portrayal by German propaganda as a wonder weapon. Instead, it was an engineering disaster that drained German resources, industrial output, skilled labor, and strategic materials while offering unreliable performance on the battlefield. The Panther demanded 2 to 3 times more man-hours for construction compared to a Panzer IV, utilized scarce alloy metals that Germany lacked in sufficient quantities by 1944, and required highly trained crews and mechanics to operate effectively. However, it broke down at a much higher rate than simpler German tanks and far more often than Allied vehicles. From a strategic standpoint, Germany would have been better off producing additional Panzer EVs, which were dependable, easy to maintain, and effective in combat, rather than investing in the technically advanced but fundamentally flawed Panther design. The notion of German technical supremacy in tank engineering was debunked by British test engineers at Chzy in 1944 and again in 1948 through rigorous scientific testing. These tests were thorough and conclusive, revealing unambiguous results. While the Panther appeared formidable with its impressive specifications and was hailed as invincible by German propaganda, it failed dramatically when subjected to standard British tank tests. This failure occurred not just once, but twice over a 3-year period using separate test programs and different vehicles sourced from various origins. The findings were refutable and corroborated by combat reports from German frontline units. The Panther proved unreliable, prone to catastrophic mechanical breakdowns, challenging to maintain, and ill-suited for sustained combat operations. Join our community to stay connected with these often unheard narratives, and we'd be thrilled to hear your thoughts. Feel free to share which corner of the world you're tuning in from. Our audience reaches from Singapore to Stockholm. Whether you're a history buff or a veteran, you are an essential part of this unique group. We appreciate your engagement and thank you for preserving these stories.